Welcome everyone to today's episode of Getting In, a College Coach Conversation. I'm Sally Ganga from College Coach. I hope you're doing okay, coping with the uncertainty of everything under the shadow of COVID-19. I can't reduce your stress around that, but hopefully we can reduce your stress a little bit around the college admission process. For our show today, for the second and third segments, I'll be joined by Shannon Vasconcelos, College Coach finance consultant and former financial aid officer at Boston University and Tufts. And she and I will be answering listener questions for all of you. So thanks so much for submitting those. But first, as you can see, if you are actually watching a video of this, I'm joined by Megan Stubendek, as well as being a very fancy person with a PhD in history from UVA, University of Virginia. I was an undergrad history major, so I was really impressed with that. Where she had experience teaching undergraduates. She also has 10 years working for Arbor Bridge, a test prep company that we're happy to say partners with College Coach. So she's going to give us an update on testing this fall, which is definitely a moving target, I think, Megan.
Yes, and it may be even into the spring. We'll sort of have to see as we talk about moves.
Yeah. Well, we're very grateful. One of the things that you can know, listeners, is that the Arbor Bridge folks send us regular emails letting us know what they're finding out, and we are extremely grateful for that. So, all right. So I thought we could kick off with a listener question that I think really kind of exemplifies the, let's just say, challenging circumstances that students are in right now when they're trying to test. So this one listener said, would it be possible for you to cover the issues with ACT registration? They seem to be having exceptional technology staffing issues on top of dealing with COVID. I know that this is problematic for many people, but I honestly feel as if they've started gaslighting students. It's clear from Reddit threads that we are not alone in being told we'll get emails, registration help, only to have tests canceled without any notification. We were supposed to get an email last week with instructions to register, which we did not. Instead, we got an email just this morning telling us that they couldn't register us and that we'd have to try to get a slot today at 10 with everyone else. This has been a disaster. I'd really like to understand what the heck is happening there that is causing them to treat so many of these students so poorly. We've been canceled 3 times. I have no confidence that I'll be able to register today. This was submitted on, I think, maybe August 3rd or so. You've been an amazing resource, and I just really need some light on how they're correcting this situation. So I don't know, Megan, I can't help with that. So I was hoping that maybe you could give some insight.
I can definitely give some insight, and I wish I could help this student move through this process as easily as possible, but even I can't do that, mostly because there are some issues happening at ACT. So we'll sort of back up and talk about the couple of different things that the student has experienced. And the student has really experienced the perfect storm of things that could go wrong in this process. And there are a number of students, he or she, they're not alone. It's happening not just in the United States, it's happening internationally to students as well, juniors, seniors. It's really across the board. So there are a couple of things that happened at ACT. The first was, of course, what we all know, spring was canceled. There weren't spring exams to be had. And so a lot of students, it created a bottleneck of demand where lots of students are trying to get the same 2 or 3 test dates this summer and fall. The second thing that happened is in June, they began to weed out the number of students who were going to be allowed to test. And the reason for that was social distancing. The ACT had to begin following guidelines, and they should, to keep students safe who were going to be taking the test. And that meant decreasing the number of students who were allowed into the test centers that were scheduled a whole year in advance when no one knew this was going to happen. And so a number of students, particularly younger students, who the ACT, when they looked at the rosters at schools and said, okay, we have to cut the school perhaps when we look at the maps and know how far we have to move students around, we need to cut by 50%, or we need to cut by 75%. And the first students that they cut were younger students who weren't graduating this year in 2020 and needed the scores for eligibility for NCAA, although that has also changed in the interim. But they began to take away their seats essentially from those test sites. So that was the second thing that was going on probably for this student. And the third was registration for the next year. So registration for ACT opens on one day for the whole world for the entire next school year. It's not some sort of rolling thing where every month they sort of open another test date a year away. It's one big day. So they opened it all, and you've got all this pent up demand from the spring. and from the summer. And all of these students want to take this test. The second thing that they tried to do at the same time, which you can debate whether this was a good idea or not, is unveil a new registration portal, a whole new tech infrastructure at the same time. So you've got new tech infrastructure, you've got all this demand, you've got all of these questions, and that all hit at the same moment. And that's why what we saw when registration opened was the system couldn't handle it. There was just too much. I think the ACT came out and said that they saw, when they went back through all of their studies of how many of the highest peak days in ACT history when they opened registration, this was 4 times the amount of demand on that first couple of hours when they opened that they've ever seen in their history, which is a lot, especially when they've got a new system running. So that's what crashed the system, and they had to take everything offline for a week and constantly kept saying, like, we're going to be back tomorrow. Wait. Actually, we're going to take it back. It's going to be on Monday. And they sort of had to move the deadline. So this student, probably by now, it's been about 2 weeks since they opened. Things have quieted down, but that first week was really tumultuous. And so if you did have trouble then and you still need a test for some reason, and if you're safe to test and you want to try and register, now I recommend going on. There's a lot less activity and you might have a greater chance of getting the test that you need or want.
How was the College Board around all this? I mean, I did hear more complaints about the ACT than the College Board. So how was that process?
College Board were pros at this in comparison. It was a really clean system. What their system did differently that I think helped change this is that they went in and locked the system. So only certain groups of students could register the first week, primarily those students who were older, who were maybe graduating seniors in 2020 and still needed those scores for something for their colleges. And they limited it to those high need students first, and the students who, like the student here, had been registered for the spring and got canceled. Those students got first sort of shot at the seats on that first week, and that throttled the demand and made it a little bit easier. So their system was able to handle. They also didn't unveil a whole new tech system at the same time, so it was a little bit easier on the SAT front. ACT, though, just was overwhelmed, and it does feel, I think, to students that they were gaslighted by the ACT, but in fact, also the ACT just was blindsided by it in many ways, and they were just trying to catch up and make sure they had enough customer service and support, and they just really didn't have it to handle that first week or so.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, they probably should have apologized fulsomely and said, we just don't know, but beyond that, I mean, tech issues happen. As you said, we can debate whether or not they should have unveiled a new system, but they also probably needed the new system for various reasons. So,
exactly.
Yeah. So what about sort of like how taking tests with social distancing? I mean, you kind of touched on that, but like, how is that going to work with students? I mean, I've been talking to, I was talking to this one student, and she's actually a junior, signed up for the fall. So I was like, I want you to know this might be a good year to delay it. If you can delay it in any year. But if you have anybody in your family who's immunocompromised, remember, I know that testing has started happening earlier and earlier, but the fact is juniors, it's designed so that juniors test in the spring of their junior year, not the fall. And that was a revelation to this family. And they said, well, just about everybody in this family is immunocompromised, so maybe we should wait. And I was like, yeah, you should probably wait. So I'm just kind of wondering what you've been hearing about that, like sort of the safety measures and things like that.
Yeah, and I think this brings up the number one thing that everyone should keep in mind is that you should test if and only it is safe for you to test. And that might be for your family or for yourself if you are immunocompromised or you have a father who is in chemotherapy or whatever it might be. There might be reasons why for you it's just not a safe option. And you as a counselor, I'm sure Sally could speak to that, of how you can address that in your application if you're concerned that not having that test score might be an issue for you or whatever it might be. And the other part is that whether or not it's safe to test in your community too is another question. So they're thinking about what test sites are available, what the transmission rates look like in your community. We're noticing that actually international students, we have it a little bit less under control here in the United States, the spread of the virus, but in some countries abroad, there are no issues with having this test right now. So there's a real difference based on where you live too. But when students do go into the site, if they decide that testing is right for them, for their application, that it's safe for them to test, they will see social distancing. This will not be like any time you've ever taken it before. The College Board and the ACT both follow practices of 6 feet distance. So the line, when you go in, will be spaced out like every line you've been in the last 3 months. The desks are spaced out 6 feet apart. Students are allowed to bring in hand sanitizer, to their desk, which was never allowed before. So bring your hand sanitizer. That's definitely something you'll have. There'll be Clorox wipes and the disinfecting wipes available. You'll also notice that proctors will look different. They will be wearing gloves. They will also ask you screening questions when you come in. The kind of classic screening questions we're seeing if you go to, like, say, a doctor's office, or where they'll ask you, have you had a temperature? Have you been in contact with someone with COVID in last 14 days? And then the proctors will all, for both SAT and ACT, will be wearing masks the entire time. So they will wear their masks. Students, though, are not required to wear masks for the ACT, but you are for SAT. So if you're an SAT student out there and you're thinking about taking the test, SAT is going to require a mask. So one thing that I would recommend, the other thing is ACT could change its mind also at the last minute, as we have seen with some of these cancellations and changes in policy. So what I recommend to all students is, in addition to bringing your number 2 pencils and your calculator, you should have your sort of COVID pack as well. And it should have hand sanitizer, and it should have a mask, whether or not you're taking SAT, ACT, because you'd hate to get to ACT and that was the day before they decided you have to have a mask and you get turned away at the door after going through the registration system. You want to make sure you have that mask. And that also means practice with a mask. Masks change the testing experience. You know, it's kind of hot and sweaty and you get a little bit sort of stifled. And when you get a little bit anxious, you breathe differently. So you definitely want to be practicing your practice test at home by wearing your mask. So do definitely put that into your repertoire as you're getting ready for these exams this time.
And make sure you have a comfortable mask. I mean, there are different levels of comfort, right? So, I mean, I find that those paper masks are more comfortable than some of the cloth masks that I've bought. So if I'm out for a walk, I want a paper mask. If I'm at the grocery store where it's really air conditioned, I'm fine with anything, but testing, no matter what, is a high stress experience. So, yeah, boy, I'm sympathetic. I mean, I think I've had my heart race and my heartbeat, you know, like I've gotten short of breath in tests before. So, all right. So what are some tips that you might have in light of some of the cancellations that are happening and, you know, all those sorts of things?
Yeah, so that first tip in terms of social distancing, I'd recommend again, mask wearing for your practice exam. That's a huge part of the testing experience. So absolutely find the perfect mask, paper, cloth. Maybe it's like that happy print that makes you feel really, you know, in your flow and self-confident, which would be great on a test day. The second thing that was in terms of registration is for those of you who were trying to get into ACT and to an ACT site and couldn't get one in those first weeks of chaos, or even an SAT. And the one thing to remember about ACT is ACT actually pre-placed a few students who were registered for, say, July or June or April, and they were canceled. They pre-placed you within 300 miles of your home to another test center before registration opened. And you might have gotten and be like, I live in Connecticut. I can't drive to Pennsylvania for my test. And you opened up and your registration was ready. What we're seeing is a lot of students canceling registrations that they had booked, moving to new places. And so there's a lot of variability happening right now inside the portal. So if you didn't get the location you wanted, you didn't get the date you wanted, keep checking back once a week. See if something has opened up or has shifted. So that's one way of trying to get a seat. And that applies both SAT and ACT. Like I said, with schools canceling or changing their policies, we might see people drop out of the testing process. Another one, like you said, Sally, was just wait. For you juniors, you don't need to rush to take the exam in the most. By the time we get to the spring, you may not have to worry about a mask. You may not have to worry about this crunch. The crunch for test sites is only for this early fall. So just take a break, take a breather. It's okay. There'll be plenty of test dates. And then the last thing that I would recommend is that some students have found success talking with their schools. Their schools, their home high school, has many times decided that they're going to offer the SAT or ACT in-house on a school day. That is an option for all high schools to do in the nation, in the United States. And so sometimes just talking to your college counselor saying, I just want to take it once, and there's enough kids, they might be willing to host for an in-day school day. And those are more likely to move forward and not be canceled at the last minute.
Yeah, well, and I would imagine students get priority then, which they don't for a Saturday test date.
Exactly. And not only do they get priority, they'll be the only ones there. Will only be students from your school. So for some schools, they're a little bit more open to the idea because they can contain who's there and coming into the school grounds, which they can't do for a national test day.
hmm I actually worked at a school that was a testing site, and I was like a proctor, or I was actually like an organizer of it. And I think that's completely what I would have gone to. Like, sorry, we're not doing Saturdays, we're doing Wednesdays, we're taking over the school, and just make things easier for our students that way, you know? What about PSAT prepping? What have you been hearing about the PSAT?
It's actually been very silent on the PSAT. It's not clear yet from the College Board or the National Merit Corporation whether or not the PSAT is going to happen this October as usual. You know, anything is possible at this point. They may delay it and do it in the spring. They could do it still in October. They could just have different dates that schools choose. It's really sort of anyone's guess at this moment. So for right now, don't stress yourself in preparing for the PSAT because most students don't need to prepare for it anyway. It's a really just a good practice diagnostic to go in and see what the SAT is all about using this PSAT or practice SAT. It's not going to count for college admissions, and just wait and see. We'll probably know a little bit more about this once we get to mid-September or early September. We should be hearing more from schools. But if you're really anxious and want to know, contact your high school college guidance office and officers there. They have an idea. They may have more of an idea of if your school will be offering it.
Okay, and I want to reiterate something here. I talk to so many families where they say, well, she just took the SAT in the fall for practice. And I'm like, well, that's what the PSAT is for. It's the practice SAT. That's what the P stands for. And they're like, oh, I didn't know that. And I'm like, yes, that's what it's for. Like, you don't need to do a practice. You have the PSAT. So I just wanted to really reiterate that. Do you run into that all the time too?
All the time, and I couldn't reiterate. I'm going to reiterate your reiteration, Sally, because it is so important. And you know, you don't waste your time, your energy, or your money using the real SAT as a practice exam or diagnostic. It's just not worth it.
All right, good. All right. Thank you for helping me reiterate that. I very much appreciate it. All right. So we will be going on to the next segment now, but thank you so much, Megan. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Sally. It was a joy as always.
Absolutely. Bye.